because we live in community with others, Father, I pray that through what is shared, that we will be moved further along the path for healing, that we might be wise in terms of how to encourage others along as well. Be with our presenter. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, well, while they're pulling up the slide, I want to take a little time to just do a recap from yesterday so that we can have a smooth transition into this evening. So yesterday we talked about family roles. We talked about what happens when there's dysfunction in the family and how family members take on survival roles because they're not able to have their internal feelings validated. They're not able to be their true self, so they need to take on or find a way to adapt and live with the pain of the dysfunction. We looked at one role being the chief enabler, and we discovered that the chief enabler on the inside has feelings of anger. That's the primary emotion. There are other emotions, but on the outside, there are a host of other emotions and behaviors. This represents that wall that a person has to put up to be able to protect themselves internally, and that's what happens, is that people put up defensive walls. The enabler comes to mind specifically because we said that the enabler in a nuclear family might be the spouse, the significant other. But enabler could be a grandparent, an enabler could be a brother or sister, it could be really anyone in the family depending on what the makeup of the family is. The point that I want to emphasize here is that the enabler actually is trying to help. The behaviors that we see on the outside are behaviors in which the enabler sort of uses to try and help the situation, but really the situation ends up getting worse. So in trying to help, let's talk about that and let's look at that for just a moment. What does trying to help look like, right? Well, in a dysfunctional family, what happens is the trying to help part becomes really me taking ownership of what the other person is responsible for themselves, right? That's what it becomes. I'm now taking ownership. I'm walking on eggshells because I don't want to say anything to make them drink or to make them, use drugs or whatever the dysfunctional behavior is. And so saying that really is internalizing the fact that there is something that I can do to make the person make the decision to pick up alcohol or drugs or to return to the dysfunctional behavior. So I'm telling myself, I'm reinforcing to myself that I'm in control, that I have some control here. Well, we know that we can't control another person's behavior. And so what happens is the enabler becomes the person, particularly in the relationship, let's say, with an alcoholic who is not only an enabler, but they also have a tendency to become codependent. And we're going to define that this evening. We're going to look at codependency here. And we're going to be able to look at codependency in a myriad of different ways, okay? Because it can look different in different relationships. So we're going to try to look at that. What do I mean when I say codependent? Well, we're going to talk about that. The title of our presentation here has to do with getting unstuck. And so what happens is that the enabler becomes stuck to the other person's problem, right? And they take ownership. That's what getting stuck means. They take ownership of that problem by reinforcing, oftentimes through their own sentiments, that there's something that they can do to either make the person use or not use or return to whatever dysfunctional behavior is happening there. So let's take a look here. So that's our foundation. That's our foundation. So we segue into tonight by way of the enabler, right? And by the way, generally speaking, when it comes to alcohol and drug addiction, individuals need enablers. The addiction needs enablers, right? It could be the pastor, it could be family, it could be the neighbors. Addiction needs an enabler. It needs someone to help to keep this going, right? Because I'm doing something that is causing me adverse consequences, very severe consequences, and yet I keep going, right? So I need someone to sort of enable that and facilitate that continued relationships. And oftentimes, as we mentioned, people become enablers unintentionally. They're not intending to be an enabler, right? We're saying that enabling hurts, but really the intent of the individual is really to help. So this is how we get into, now we become very codependent because we're taking ownership of something that really doesn't belong to me. It's really up to that person, right? Now you see the word dependency there. I'm going to show you tonight how that this is a type of addiction as well. I'm going to show you that, right? Not of the chemical variety, right? But a behavioral variety here. Now, I have borrowed this so graciously from CODA. I don't know if you've heard of CODA, but it's Codependency Anonymous, right? They have some really good materials here, so I've given them credit for this. And I've done this purposely because there is support out there for individuals who are struggling with this. So number one, because they have some good information, and number two, to direct you to where you can find resources for support, and they have them there. Listen to this definition here. Somewhere along the line, we learn to doubt our perception, discount our feelings, and I want you to think of everything that we talked about last night because it ties right in, and overlook our needs, right? Remember, the enabler, they are all about the other person's problem. They're all about what's going on with the other person, right? In the meantime, you know, while the person is involved in their dysfunctional behavior, the enabler is picking up the pieces, right? They're making sure that things don't fall apart, right? They become absolutely consumed with the other person's, with their reaction and responding to the other person's dysfunction, right? Meanwhile, their own needs get unmet. And so this is how we fall into codependency here. Our needs are overlooked. We look to others to tell us what we think, feel, and behave, right? You tell me every time that you do that, you make me want to go drink. I start to believe that. I start to believe that I'm wrong. I start to believe that you're drinking, I'm just using that for an example, whatever the dysfunction might be, is my fault, right? So we looked to others to tell us what we think, feel, and behave. Other people supplied us with the information about who we were and should be, okay? It became more important to be compliant or avoidant rather than to be authentic, and we adopted rigid beliefs about what should be. We believed that if we could just get it right, things would be okay, right? Don't make daddy upset tonight. Don't say that, you know. So the whole family's walking on eggshells, right? So that daddy won't lose his cool and blow up and cause some, you know, major catastrophe, and the family's left, you know, in a chaotic state. Now, let's not do that. So even the children are taught, right, that if you behave perfectly, there won't be any problems, right? And imagine growing up with that type of mentality, right? We got it wrong. When we got it wrong, that is, our sense of security and self-worth evaporated. Doesn't that make sense, right? Because you can't behave perfectly enough to control somebody else's out of control behavior, right? You can't behave perfectly enough. But that doesn't stop us from trying oftentimes. And this part is so true that when we got it wrong, our sense of security and self-worth evaporate. All right, so what's codependency? And I have some more here. Codependency is an addiction to the positive or negative opinions of other people. okay? Codependency is a life lived in reference to others at the expense of self, right? Now, we're going to talk about this, and what I want you to be able to, I'm going to help us to differentiate here, the difference between, relying on someone in a healthy manner, for support, guidance, right? And being overly reliant on an individual. There's a difference. There's a difference, right? The overly reliant comes at the expense of self, okay? So we're going to talk more about how it's an addiction in just a moment. Codependency is based on fear of abandonment and of not surviving the abandonment. So I've been in the field for a long time, and I've seen this happen. And I'm going to use this just as an example, understanding that there are tons and tons of dysfunctions, that people take on roles in families who are dysfunctional, whatever the dysfunctional behavior might be. But I'm just going to use alcoholism here for an example, right? So what I've seen happen is that the alcoholic will go to treatment and will get help and will get better, right? But the enabler did not get any help. They did not get better, right? And when the alcoholic left, the enabler was completely lost. Completely lost. What do I do? Right? Because their identity became wrapped up in taking care of, looking after this person's sick. As long as you're sick, I have a reason to be needed. But now you got well, now you're going out to these meetings, and now you're talking about you have a sponsor and you don't need me anymore? I'm the one that cleaned up after you. I'm the one that made sure that this house didn't fall apart. And now you don't need me? What's happening? What's happening? What is happening here, right? Well, this here is set in, right? Codependency is this. If you don't get anything else tonight, please get this. Codependency is a normal reaction to living in a dysfunctional family. It's a normal reaction. It is, in a sense, it's nobody's fault, right? When there's dysfunction in a home, there are elements of codependency that are naturally going to be there. It is going to happen, right? It's a normal reaction living in a dysfunctional family. So I want you to remember that as we go through here, that this is normal. Codependency is living with things that are out of control by creating the illusion of control, right? And it's important to create this illusion of control because, remember, that control is very much tied to my self-worth and my self-esteem. Very much. So if things are out of control, if things are chaotic, then I internalize that as me being inadequate, right? And that sort of enhances my insecurity, so forth and so on. Now, again, I get these, and we're going to look at these here, but this here comes from, and I guess I made it so small that we can't see it, but this here is taken from coda.org, so I want to give credit here. I thought this was good. No need to sort of reinvent the wheel here. Codependents often have difficulty identifying what they are feeling, right? In recovery, for someone who recovers from codependence, they are aware of their feelings and identify them often in the moment. I know the difference between my thoughts and my feelings. So in codependency and active codependency, I have difficulty identifying my feelings. When I am in recovery though, right, and I've been able to work through this, I'm able now to have an awareness of my feelings in the moment, very present, and I know the difference between thoughts and feelings. Other denial patterns: minimize, alter, or deny how they truly feel, right? Codependents will do this. In recovery, I embrace my feelings. They are valid and important. In denial of codependency, right? Codependents perceive themselves as completely unselfish and dedicated to the well-being of others, right? They're dedicated, they've sacrificed, and this is how they view themselves in denial here. In recovery, I know the difference between caring and care. Recognize that caretaking others is often motivated, that should say, a motivated need to benefit myself, right? I'm getting something out of this. You're sick, I'm caring for you, I'm getting something out of this, right? And that's, so there's a difference there, right? In denial, codependents often mask pain in various ways, such as anger, humor, or isolation. In recovery, I'm aware of my painful feelings and express them appropriately. Other patterns of denial, codependents often label others with their negative traits. In recovery, I acknowledge that I may own the negative traits I often perceive in others, right? Low self-esteem patterns, again, coda.org. I want to give credit here. Here are low self-esteem patterns. Codependents often have difficulty making decisions. And you could think about why. Because if I make a wrong decision, right, a decision that you don't like, now you're upset with me, now my self-worth takes a hit, right? Yeah. So in recovery, though I accept myself as I am, I emphasize progress over perfection. Codependents often, in low self-esteem patterns, judge what they think, say, or do harshly as never good enough, right? In recovery, I accept myself as I am. I emphasize progress progress over perfection. The third one is where I meant to go here. Value others. Codependents often value others' approval of their thinking, feelings, and behavior over their own. And in recovery, I value the opinions of those I trust without needing to gain their approval. I have confidence in myself. Codependents often need to appear to be right in the eyes of others and may even lie to look good. In recovery, I am honest with myself about my behaviors and motivations. I feel secure enough to admit mistakes to myself and others and to hear their opinions without feeling threatened. They have trouble setting healthy priorities and boundaries. But in recovery, I'm able to establish and uphold healthy priorities and boundaries in my life. Compliance patterns of codependence. Codependents often are extremely loyal and remain in harmful situations too long. Too long. What keeps them there? You know, on the outside looking in, you might say, what's going on with them? I would have gotten out of there, right? But there's something that comes into play here. We're going to talk a little bit more about this this evening. But remain in harmful situations too long. In recovery, though, I'm committed to my safety. You notice here that in recovery, the priority is who? The priority is me. The priority is the self. I am committed to my safety and leave situations that feel unsafe or are inconsistent with my goals or values. Codependents often compromise their own values and integrity to avoid rejection or anger. I'm going to do things that I really don't want to do and I really don't feel comfortable doing, right? Because I don't want to hear it, right? But in recovery, I am rooted in my own values, even if others don't agree or become angry, right? So in recovery here, there's this detaching from needing from others' opinions, right? And finding their value, their personal value and self-worth in other people's validation of them. Compliance patterns. Codependents often put aside their own interests in order to do what others want. In recovery, I consider my interests and feelings when asked to participate in others' plans. Codependents often are afraid to express their beliefs, opinions, and feelings when they differ from those of others. In recovery, I respect my own opinion and feelings and express them appropriately. Compliance pattern. Codependents often accept sexual attention when they want love. In recovery, my sexuality is grounded in genuine intimacy and connection. When I need to feel love, I express my heart's desire. I do not settle for sex without love, right? When we look at so many relationships that are in shambles today, we can sort of begin to see why. What about control patterns, right? The need to be in control here. These are all characteristics of codependence. Codependents often have to feel needed in order to have a relationship with others, right? If you don't need me, then I really don't have a place. I don't know where my place is here, right? In recovery, I develop relationships with others based on equality, intimacy, and balance, right? Codependents often adopt an attitude of indifference, helplessness, authority, or rage to manipulate outcomes. In recovery, I treat others with respect and consideration and trust my higher power to meet my needs and desires. Codependents often use sexual attention to gain approval and acceptance. In recovery, I embrace and celebrate my sexuality as evidence of my health and wholeness. I do not use it to gain the approval of others. Codependents often believe people are incapable of taking care of themselves, right? You need me. You need me. In recovery, I realize that with rare exceptions, other adults are capable of managing their own lives. You don't need me to manage your life for you. Codependents often demand that their needs be met by others, right? But in recovery, I find and use resources that meet my needs without making demands on others, right? I ask for help when I need it without expectation, right? And so those demands are similar to those shoulds that we read about earlier, the way things should be, right? Here, the person who is struggling with codependency has these demands, which means that there's intolerance there, that there's really no other way, right? And so when those demands aren't met, then it's very uncomfortable in that regards. And so recovery is where we want to be. Last one, avoidance patterns, right? These are all patterns that people who struggle with codependency may take. Codependents often avoid emotional, physical, and sexual intimacy as a way to maintain distance. In recovery, I engage in emotional, physical, or sexual intimacy when it is healthy and appropriate for me. Codependents often allow addictions to people, places, and things to distract them from achieving intimacy in relationships. In recovery, I practice my recovery to develop healthy and fulfilling relationships. This again is from CODA. This is on their website, coda.org. Codependents often use indirect or evasive communication to avoid conflict or confrontation. In recovery, I use direct and straightforward communication to resolve conflicts and to deal appropriately with confrontations. And some of this as well, when we look at these avoidance patterns, some of this is that individuals have been impacted by codependency and maybe they have gotten out of the relationship, but they haven't healed. And so the way now that they go about dealing with their relationships is to just avoid. Right? Codependents often suppress their feelings or needs to avoid feeling vulnerable. Again, I don't want to be in that space again. I recognize that there was something really wrong there, right? So I just stay away. But in recovery, I embrace my own vulnerability by trusting and honoring my feelings and needs. And then codependents often believe displays of emotion are a sign of weakness, especially for those who have these avoidance patterns. But in recovery, I honor my authentic emotions and share them when appropriate. So these are all different patterns here for individuals who experience codependence. Now, let's talk about how those patterns may look in different types of relationships, right? So codependency can manifest in various types of relationships, including romantic relationships, friendships, and family relationships, right? And so in romantic relationships here, codependence in romantic relationships often involve one partner becoming overly reliant on the other for emotional support and validation, right? This can result in an imbalanced dynamic where one partner is always giving and the other is always taking. Codependent partners may struggle to set boundaries and prioritize their own needs, leading to resentment and a sense of being trapped in the relationship. You know, even in an intimate relationship, even in a marriage, there is a large part of independence there, right? And then you have, you know, the relationship when you come together, right? But there's still some independence. Well, an individual who suffers and struggles with codependence, they're going to be uncomfortable with that independence. You know, they're going to be uncomfortable there. That's going to make them feel really insecure, right? That's going to make them feel like they're really not needed, or you're unhappy with them, right? You want to go to the store without me, or, you know, those types of things. Family relationships. Codependency in family relationships often involves a parent-child dynamic where the parent is overly enmeshed with the child, leading to a lack of healthy boundaries and independence. This can result in the child being overly responsible for the parent's emotions and needs, leading to a sense of guilt and very, very strong obligation, right? And what happens is, let's say if it's a parent-child dynamic here, as we've been talking about, eventually that child grows up, right? Maybe that child grows up and maybe that child gets married, right? And so now that child is now an adult who has a partner and says, hey, you know, it's us now. But guess what? That relationship is still dominated by the child's strong sense of obligation to meet the needs of the parent. And now that's going to cause some problems there, right? Unless, of course, there's some intervention there. Codependent family members may struggle to maintain healthy boundaries and assert their own needs, leading to a sense of being trapped in the family dynamic, okay? And then what about friendships? What about friendships? Codependence in friendships can take many forms, but often involves one friend being overly dependent on the other for emotional support or validation. This can result in an unhealthy dynamic where one friend is always giving and the other is always taking. Codependent friends may struggle to maintain boundaries and prioritize their own needs, leading to feelings of resentment and burnout, even in friends. Now, doesn't stop there, right? What about at work? There is the international agency that looks at diseases. They call it, for abbreviation, ICD, International Classification of Diseases, actually says that today, that's, by the way, I think 11th or 11th edition, says that that occupational burnout is a phenomenon in the workplace. It's a phenomenon. Many people are burned out. Well, let's take a look at here how codependence even plays a part there as well. Often involves going above and beyond for others to an unhealthy extent. You may find yourself consistently taking on extra responsibilities or sacrificing your own needs to gain validation or maintain harmony. And of course, you may have difficulty delegating and saying no. So if you're a person that has difficulty saying no, then of course, you know, you're more likely, especially in the workplace, to experience burnout. My experience is if you won't say no, people won't say no for you. So the more that you believe they can do, the more that you believe you can do, the more they think you can do as well. So that's how it plays a part in the workplace. So I just want you to see that that dynamic there. So now we come to a point where we ask ourselves, you know, who are you? The codependent must ask, who am I, right? Because again, the enabler's identity has become wrapped up in caring for the needs of a person who really has the responsibility to take care of that need themselves. But now the codependent has stepped into that role, and that's their identity. Without that person, we're left with this question: who am I? Who am I? Where do I belong? Where's my place? They don't need me anymore. It's very interesting. I remember years ago, there was one statistic that showed that most divorces happen when individuals get into recovery. Not before, right? And I thought at that time that was amazing. I'm not sure what that statistic is today, but I do remember hearing that. But based on these dynamics, I can understand why. I can understand why, right? Because I don't have a place anymore. Now I've got it. You want me to? I spent all that time changing into what I thought you needed me to be. Now you come home from treatment or from whatever, and you're not that person anymore. So you don't need the person that I am now. So you're telling me I've got to change again, right? And there's bitterness, there's resentment, right? And there's a really difficult time reconciling there. Codependents will never say no for fear of upsetting someone. allow others to dictate how you feel about yourself, find yourself overworked and overscheduled, that's the work dynamic, focus on others' problems even when it negatively impacts when it negatively impacts you mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and all the rest, and believe that your worth, this is really important, that your worth is determined by doing rather than by being. Now, there's a lot more that could be said on that. I don't really have time to go into that tonight, but really, even as we are raising and rearing our children, we oftentimes applaud and confirm them based on their performance. And I want you to think about what that creates as they grow up. Think about what that creates. I remember my wife gave me a book one time, and I can't remember what the name of the book, but it was about the relationship between fathers and daughters. And I remember that the book suggested that I should compliment my daughters on their character and on who they are, and not just on what they do or on their, on their looks or something like that. And I thought about that and I said, wow, I began to understand the importance of that, the importance of internal validation, and letting them know that, listen, that it's important not to set them up, that, hey, if you don't bring home the grade that I think you should bring home, or if you don't do or make the decision that I think you should make, if you don't perform the way that I think you should, I still accept you, that I still love you, I still value you, you are still my child, right? And rather than saying, hey, because you didn't do well, now, I'm not so happy with you, but if you do what I want you to do, then great. And so we're kind of setting up that way, and we don't want to do that, right? We don't want worth to be determined on doing. We want worth to be determined on being. You're a human being, right? You're a child of God in that sense. Now, this here is very interesting, and I'm going to just close shortly here. But oftentimes I put here compulsive relationships because this is the other tie to addiction, right? This is why this is also addiction. So addiction is very much about compulsivity. Compulsivity means that I'm doing something that I can't stop, even though I'm experiencing adverse consequence. I can't stop, right? So I'm repeating the same behaviors over and over. This happens in relationships, where people end up in relationships with people, different people, but the same type of issues, right? It doesn't matter where they are, right? It's almost like that troubled person will find them, or they will find that troubled person. Of all the people in the world to pick, right? They will become matched with the one person that's going to create havoc in their life, right? Well, there's a reason why that happens. That doesn't mean that a person just has bad luck, right? It doesn't mean even that a person is looking for this type of individual. It is because there are interlocking traits. When we talk about compulsivity in the relationship, we're talking about two individuals, the codependent, who we've spent most of our time focusing on, right? But there's another player. That person is the counterdependent. Now, I want you to know why here that no matter who you are, if you're codependent, chances are you're going to end up in a relationship with a counterdependent. And if you're counter-dependent, chances are you're going to end up in a relationship with a codependent. You can be in Kalamazoo, which I know that that's a real place in Michigan, but that's a saying. I guess that's where that comes from. You can be in Ohio, where I'm from. You can be in California. You can be in South Africa. You can be in England, Ireland. It doesn't matter. If you, as a codependent, maintain these traits here, right, it is very likely that you are going to end up with a counterdependent. That's who you're going to be attracted to. That's who you're going to draw, right? And here's why. Look at the characteristics of the codependent and the counterdependent, and you will see here how they match perfectly. The codependent has low self-esteem, right? Low self-esteem, low self-worth, but the counterdependent is grandiose. What does grandiose mean? Grandiose means that they have a exaggerated idea of their abilities, right? This is why a counter-dependent will usually find themselves in a relationship with someone that they think they can fix. This is why. This is why. Okay? The codependent is, of course, dependent, while the counter-dependent is independent, right? So in other words, a counter-dependent says, I don't need you, right? And because I can do this by myself, while the codependent says, well, great, because I need you, because I can't do it by myself, right? The codependent is others-centered. It's all about you. It's all about your needs. It's all about what's going on with you, right? And while the counter-dependent is self-centered. So in other words, the counter-dependent says, I'm all about me, and you're all about me. We don't have no problem here, right? It's a perfect match. It's a perfect match. Now watch this. The counter-dependent is intrusive. What is intrusive? Okay? And I think probably the best way to demonstrate this is to have, can I borrow you? I need to borrow you, all right? All right, I'm going to give you an example. Yeah, come on up. I'm going to give you an example here of what intrusiveness looks like, okay? Now watch this. Now, this is Tamara, my sister-in-law, okay? Now, Tamara's got a problem. Let's say she's come home from work and she's got a problem, okay? And she is codependent. I'm counter-dependent. So I'm going to come home and I'm going to say, hey, what's going on? What's the matter? And she's going to tell me nothing. She doesn't want to talk about it, all right? She doesn't want to talk about it. By the way, that's not a typical reaction of a codependent, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to demonstrate this. So whatever I say, you just say, I don't want to talk about it. I just, okay. Hey, what's wrong? What's going on? Are you sure? Because...
No, I'm fine. Yeah.
But you look like something is going on. Listen, you can tell me. You can talk to me.
No, I'm okay. Like, seriously.
Okay, you're saying you're okay, but you really don't look okay.
I mean...
You need
I just said I was okay, like...
You need to talk to me. Okay, let's start right there. Do you see what's happening? What's happening? What is she saying clearly? She's saying, what? Leave, yeah. No, I'm not interested. What am I doing? I'm continuing to pursue. This is intrusive. I'm not respecting her boundary, right? But now watch this, because this is the response of a codependent. So I've showed you the intrusiveness of the counterdependent. And the only way that this works, only way this relationship works, is that the counterdependent needs someone who is receptive, right? So now watch what happens, okay? I'm gonna ask her, hey, what's going on? She's gonna say no, I don't want to talk about it. And I'm gonna accept her no, okay? Hey, Tamara, what's going on? It looks like something's wrong. Why don't you talk to me about it?
No, I'm okay. I'm all right. Just, no, it's cool.
Okay, well, all right.
I mean, I'm okay, but gracious, you could have, like...
Well, you said you didn't want to talk, so...
I mean, I don't want to talk, but it's not meaning, like, I don't necessarily want you... I mean, whatever. Okay, just whatever. Go.
Okay, so what's happening? This intrusiveness is validating to her. She needs that. That helps her feel cared for. The moment that I don't do that, it makes her feel like, well, she's not important enough. Her situation is not important. I don't really care about her. And that, her insecurity becomes unhinged then. You see? It starts coming to the surface. So in a dysfunctional way, this is how it works. This is how it works. I say, what's wrong? She says, I don't want to talk about it. I say, well, okay, right? She has a fit. She's upset about that, right? On the other hand, I keep prying. And even though she's saying, no, she really wants that, that's validation to her, right? Thank you so much. All right, so I just wanted to be able to demonstrate to you Yes, give her a hand. She did very well. So I just want to demonstrate to you how this works. So what you have here is these are interlocking traits. These are interlocking characteristics. This is why that doesn't matter who you are, that if you have these characteristics traits and you're not able to deal with them and heal from them, you will continue to attract a counter-dependent. If you're a counter-dependent and you have those traits, you will continue to attract a codependent. Of all the people in the world, of all the people, you will attract someone who you think that you can fix, who you think is broken, right? And vice versa. So this is the compulsivity. This is the addictive part of codependency. This is why it is also an addiction in this regard. And oftentimes people have these traits and they don't recognize it. And they'll say, man, I just don't know why I keep ending up with the same, well, this is why. This is why. All right, so we're going to prepare to end here. And we'll talk about, well, we've already talked in some ways what recovery looks like, but how do you begin to heal? So as we go on throughout the week, we're going to continue to talk about that and begin to put it all together. So give you a little bit here, but then we're going to put it all together, and tomorrow's going to be very helpful as well. So some people say, well, codependency is, we don't like the word codependency. We think that the real issue is self-love deficit disorder. Now, I can assure you that there is no self-love deficit disorder in the DSM-5, which is what counselors and psychiatrists use to diagnose. However, there's a reason why they're saying that there is a self-love deficit disorder and self-love, and so this pyramid then kind of explains what they mean here, because they view self-love as the cure to codependence. And I don't doubt that self-love plays a major role in curing codependence. I don't think it's the only thing, but I think that it gets us way, way closer to being well. And that's what we want. We want to be well. Because what we just demonstrated and what we show and what we've talked about plays out in many arenas in life, many environments, right? Even plays out in your family, in your churches, in your community. It plays out, right? And people don't necessarily realize what's going on. And a lot of times at the bottom of this pyramid is what you could see here is an attachment to trauma. And that's really what it is, right? If I grew up in a home where there was physical abuse or drug abuse or alcoholism, right? Well, that's traumatic. That's traumatic, right? That's traumatic. And so there's an attachment there. And that's where we get into this sort of codependency, right? There's an attachment there. And so what we want to do, right, is we want to be able to get some treatment for that, right? And so attachment trauma resolution on the other side here is sort of where we want to be. Now, oftentimes as we go a step up the pyramid, we see that the core of the individual is shame, insecurity, right? Inadequacies. All of those primary emotions that we discovered last night from those family roles, right? There was fear, there was inadequacy, there was guilt, there was shame. All of that is there. We've got to deal with who we are. Remember, we asked the question, who are we? Who are you then, right? Apart from the trauma no longer defines you. So now who are you, right? It's your new identity, right? And so when we begin to deal with our core selves, we move away from shame and we want to move toward self-love, right? Pathological loneliness can be an issue as well, especially when we talk about relationships, because we move away from the dysfunctional people. And so we find ourselves, maybe experiencing some loneliness there, but we learn then in recovery to gain some peace without the chaos, right? So in a dysfunctional family and in codependence, that chaos is sort of what we're used to. It's familiar. And so in some ways, it's comfortable because it's familiar, right? But we learn as we move away from that dysfunction that actually that's not peaceful at all, that there is a type of peace that we come to know that is absent of the dysfunction in our lives. And we learn to be able to achieve that without the dysfunctional people around. And then we have self-love deficit disorder, addiction there. And then on the other side, we have this mutual reciprocity where we begin to work our way up toward finding ourselves and being able to love ourselves. I would just add to this that self-love, the basis of self-love really is because and when we begin to recognize that we are wonderfully and fearfully made, that God sent his son to die for us, and he loved us first. And so because we're created with a purpose, and that purpose isn't just focused on other people's problems and other people's issues, right? We're created to actually bring God glory, and that's why we're born. We're born because we're loved. And so I remember, I know for myself, being from a humble beginnings in which, my parents weren't married and very, very young when they had me. My mom was, pregnant with me at 14 and so forth. And so I realized when I learned the story of how my parents met, I said to myself, well, so you mean, I shouldn't even be here, that this was an accident. And so through some sort of working on myself and examining, I learned that even though I may have been born in less than ideal circumstances and situations, I was born because God chose me to be born, because he chose me to love on me, right? And because of that, I began to know that I am worth love and I'm worthy of love, and that I have a purpose in my life, and my purpose is not just to be consumed with other people's pain and with other people's needs and that sort of thing, right? It is to bring God glory. He chose me. And so we're going to talk more about the recovery process here from codependence, and I think that as we move throughout the week, we've got 3 more days now. Tomorrow we're going to talk about, as I move away from the dysfunction that was my life and that was my identity, that I must go through a healing process. What does that healing process look like? And what we'll find is that I go through a grieving process, that I must grieve that, right? I must grieve that in order to be able to heal the emotional pain, but I must do so in a way that allows me to come away healed, right? So I'm no longer seeking the counter-dependent, or I'm no longer seeking the codependent, okay? So with that said, we want to stop right there, and just got about 5 minutes or so, but does anyone have any questions based on what we've shared this evening? If not, that means that either, we did a pretty decent job, or we just don't have any questions. All right, that's good.
I did have a question.
Okay.
Because you picked up on it, something in regards to, because this codependent type of attitude or codependent mindset, how do you see, can you give an example of how this may actually impact someone's spiritual walk or the community of like believers? Because I heard you bring it up, but I think we can see it like, oh yeah, in dysfunctional families, but we look at churches as like perfect edifices and like all these perfect people come together, but how does that play out? How can that play out?
Yeah. Well, no, that's a really good question. So I think that because churches are full of people, and, in many ways our vulnerability comes out when we have to interact and deal with people. And so coming into a church, I think these same kind of characteristics can come, where a person feels like they have to feel needed. If they're not needed, then, they go. Or they need some level of chaos. They need some level of dysfunction in order to feel at home, right? And so they'll seek that out. And that's the codependent as well, right? Or they'll be completely avoidant, right? And not really wanting to connect, not really wanting to take the risk because they haven't healed, right? The other thing is, if you have a religion that is based very heavily on your performance, right? And you find yourself not being able to measure up. Well, and you have the illness of codependency, then what happens is the shame, right? You become consumed with the shame because you're not good enough. And I have met people like that, and I've seen people like that, you know, where it's always about we're so sinful, and but really it's shame. And you know, shame is very different, and I'm sure you've probably heard this before, that shame is very different than guilt. You know, guilt, if you make a mistake or maybe you do something wrong and you feel guilty about it, your conscience, you know, you convicts you, you're convicted, and you confess, you know, your faults. Maybe you confess them to God, maybe you need to go and confess to somebody else. But shame is a little bit different, because shame says that you are a mistake, you know, that you, it's not what you did, it's you, right? And that hits at the very core of your being in that regard. And so if you accept a religion that is very performance-based, and you find yourself failing and not able to measure up, then you're going to have some real problems. The other part of that is that you will have a tendency to pull other people into that as well and see other people in the same way. And so you may become very rigid, because you have these very rigid values and very little empathy, inability to have compassion, right? And the inability to connect with someone else, you know, in their struggle and provide them some hope, right? Everything is more rigid. It's about what you shouldn't be doing and so forth and so on. And a lot of that is projection because of what we're really facing and feeling internally. So I don't know if that answers your question or that helps, but yeah, there's a lot of different dynamics and facets to that. So, yeah. Anyone else? Anything else comes to mind? Okay. If not, all right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for coming out this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out. Thank you for the presentation. Let us bow our heads together for a word of prayer. Loving Father and our God, we are grateful for the time that we've had to be here together in this place. And Lord, we pray that you would help us to be healed. I know in my own life, it's just so easy to see oftentimes what's wrong with the people around me. But I think what we've been presented with is that when we live and are in community with people who are broken like we are, that every one of us is affected. And so we pray for your divine healing to be experienced in each and every one of our lives, that we might come to know that we are loved and lovable by and through your grace. We pray that this might be uppermost in our minds as we leave this place tonight. Keep us until we meet again tomorrow night. In Jesus' name, amen.